Hello and welcome back to Kim Reads as we continue with Nancy Drew Whispers in the Fog. Chapter 7, Strike 2. Nancy skidded to a stop and ran to Bess, who lay on the ground, her arm twisted beneath her handlebars. Her right calf was scraped and bleeding, but she was conscious. Bess, how do you feel? Nancy asked. She unbuttoned Bess's jacket and then checked her pulse. Do you feel dizzy? Or are you sick to your stomach? Did you hit your head? My wrist hurts, Bess answered, but I think I'm okay otherwise. Carefully, Nancy and George lifted the handlebars off Bess's arm. The front wheel of her bike lay about 4 yards down the road. Ned struggled to his feet and shook his head and arms. Are you okay, Ned? Nancy called back over her shoulder. Yes, I'm fine, Ned said, and walked over to where Nancy knelt cautiously, feeling Bess's wrist. I don't think it's broken, Nancy said, but we need to have a doctor check it out just in case. I don't like the looks of that scrape on your leg either, Bess. What scrape? Bess leaned up a little on one elbow and looked at her left leg. Blood trickled down from a bad scrape the size of her hand. Bits of dirt and weed clung to her raw flesh. Wow, Bess says. I can't even feel that, but it looks horrible. You're in shock, Nancy pointed out. You hit pretty hard. You're going to feel that later, I bet, George said. What happened? I don't know exactly, Bess said. My front wheel started to feel sort of shimmy, and then I just hit that bump, and I don't know, it just seemed to fly apart. We passed a payphone, George said. I'll ride back and call Katie. She can pick Bess up and take her to a doctor or a clinic somewhere. I don't think they got one in Seabreak. George rode off, and Nancy and Ned did what they could to make Bess comfortable. Ned eased his folded jacket underneath her head. Nancy carefully dabbed at Bess's wound with tissue. Are you sure you're okay, Ned? Nancy asked. You hit that tree pretty hard. I'm okay, actually. The bike took most of the impact. Looks like Katie has some major bike rehab work ahead of her, especially on the one Bess was riding, Nancy said. She and Ned gathered up parts of Bess's bike and put them in the pile. Ned studied Bess's broken bike. You know a lot about bikes, Ned. Can you tell what happened? Nancy asked. Looks like one of the cone nuts might have come loose, Ned told her. This is a cone nut, and the washer goes with it. He opened his hand and showed her. I found them near the bump in the road where Bess and the bike broke apart. Ned picked up the front of the bike, which was no longer connected to the wheel. This two-pronged piece of metal that comes down from the handlebars is called the fork, he said. It holds the wheel on. The axle runs between the two prongs of the fork and is held on by the cone nuts on both sides. He pointed to the nut and washer on the left side. See, here are the cone nut and washer on this side. They're still intact. Then he pointed to the right side of the fork. But this side of the axle isn't connected to the fork anymore. It pulled away. The wheel spun off and Bess was done. And the axle pulled apart because the nut came off? Nancy repeated. Right, Ned said. It must have been loose. George came shooting back on her bike. Katie's on her way. She said the nearest clinic is about 30 miles down the coast. She called their 24-hour emergency number to tell them we're coming. That sounds like where we were this morning, Bess said, around where Andrew Jason's office is. Kate arrived just a few minutes later. Ned and Nancy helped Bess into the second seat of Katie's van where she could stretch out. Katie and George fastened the bike so that Nancy and George had ridden on the racks at the top of the van. Nancy and Ned took the seats at the back of the van just in front of the hold where Katie had thrown down damaged bikes. George and Katie jumped in the front seat and they headed down the coast. During the ride to the clinic, Nancy and her friends told Katie about the possible stalker in the Cypress Cathedral and the confrontation in the diner. At the clinic, Bess had a wrist x-ray. Ned was also checked out and was pronounced healthy. Katie and George stayed with Bess while her leg was being cleaned and bandaged. After Ned was released, Nancy got the keys to Katie's van and she and Ned went outside. I want to take another look at that bike axle, Nancy said, unlocking the back of the van. Ned took out the broken bike and had thrown Bess. They had checked in over carefully in the light from the interior of the van. Finally, Ned spoke. Do you think the cone could have come loose on purpose? He wondered, his voice hushed. Well, it seems odd that it would be loose, Nancy said. Katie rehabs these bikes and keeps them in shape herself. She seems very thorough. I can't see her climbing on a bike without checking to make sure the cone nuts are secure and everything's in good shape. It just doesn't make sense. Nancy aimed her penlight at the axle that had been disconnected. She bent down to get a closer look. There, she said. Look at that. Ned bent over and squinted in the beam of broad light. Whoa, he said in a whisper. It's been cut, Nancy said quietly, running her finger around the end of the axle. Someone cut it halfway through, she added, and she felt the smooth edge around the part of the rim. Then her finger hit a sharp jagged point. When she hit that bump, Ned began, it snapped the rest of the way, Nancy finished. Well, if it isn't Miss Lowell, a familiar voice spoke to her. Startled, Nancy felt her shoulders jump. She turned to see Andy Jason walking toward her. Nancy turned back to the closed van. I'm Lenny Lowell, she whispered to Ned. Then she turned back her face and approaching Jason. Mr. Jason, she said, extending her hand. Andy, remember? Jason said, giving her a firm handshake and just doing with the other hand toward the clinic door. What are you doing here? Not ill, I hope. No, my friend, actually, my photographer, Jane. You remember her, sure. She took a spell of her bike and we came here for an x-ray. This is Ned Nordstrom, she said, adding to Ned. Nice to meet you. Jason shook Ned's hand. Ned smiled and then mumbled a greeting. I was at the library, Jason said, pointing to a small building across town. We've just had a little presentation about whales and their migrating habits. Sorry you didn't know about it. You might have enjoyed the talk. I'm sure I would have, Nancy said, smiling. Well, Jane is probably right now. It was nice seeing you again. She turned back to the clinic. Miss Lowell, Jason called to her. What's this, riding with the competition? Nancy turned to see Jason reading the sign painted on the side of Katie's van. Actually, Miss Firestone drove by as Jane fell and kindly offered us a ride to the clinic. Nancy was diving deeper into deception with every word. She knew she needed to get to the clinic to warn the others before they came over and blew her cover. Really, Jason said. He gave her a quizzical look, and for a moment she wasn't sure he didn't believe her. But why wouldn't he? She asked herself. He has no reason to suspect me. It's nice to see you again, Mr. Jason, Nancy said. Now, if you excuse us, we should go in. Yes, of course, Jason said. He started back up, watching Nancy carefully. You told that Katie Firestone that I never go up, he called out. She hasn't heard the last from me. Nancy smiled and waved, and then she and Ned raced up the clinic steps and into the building. The doctor was telling Bess that a radiologist would call about the X-ray result the next day. While they walked to the van, Nancy and Ned told the others about their meeting with Andy Jason. As Katie backed the van out of the clinic parking lot, Nancy noticed a large luxury car parked in the shadows, away from the lights. Katie pulled out the road. From her vantage point, the window in the rear of the van, Nancy saw a face of the driver in the luxury car. It was Andy Jason. He was definitely watching them. Katie, I need to stop at the sheriff's office on the way back. He said, I want to show me your bike. What are you saying? Bess asked, sitting up at the start. Are you telling me it wasn't an accident? What Nancy and Ned told the others their suspicions. When she hit the bump, the axle broke, Nancy concluded. Boy, Jenna's gonna be sorry she hit the sack early, Katie muttered. She missed all the excitement. No one spoke again until they reached the sheriff's office. Nancy, Ned, and Katie took the bike into the small building. Sheriff Harvey was leaving, so they gave him a quick report and left the bike. The sheriff seemed very interested in Nancy and Ned's theory of the bike accident. He also told them to expect to have analysis of the fingerprints taken from Katie's vandalized boat by the next day. Nancy also mentioned the possible stalking in the Cypress Cathedral. When they reached the inn where Nancy, Ned, and Bess were staying. Katie and George dropped them off. I think you all need to sleep in a little inn tomorrow, Katie said. Why don't you come down to the house about 10? We'll have a late breakfast. Nancy and Ned waved the others off, then helped Bess limp to the inn. Upstairs, Ned went to his room, and Nancy unlocked the door to the room, and she shared with Bess. Bess complained that her leg was starting to get pretty sore. She limped and hopped in the room and over to her bed. As she made her way, she dragged a small piece of folded paper halfway across the rag rug. Finally, Bess's foot left the paper behind as she climbed up on her bed. Nancy reached down to pick up a piece of paper. Clutching the note, she turned it back to Bess and unfolded the paper to find a hand-printed note. So sorry your friend got hurt, but it's your own fault. This is just the beginning unless you get back off and stay out of things that are none of your business. And that's the end of that chapter. See you later.